Hey students, welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to be teaching you my main opening. This is an opening that I've been learning my entire life. It got me from beginner to intermediate. Then I kept it and I still play it today as my main opening. I, of course, play many other openings, but whenever I have to play a decisive game, whenever I feel like I have to play my best, I play the Pirc. Now, we already went over the check Pirc, and if you're already playing it, it's working for you, fine. You don't have to switch to this. But I feel like I'm ready to show you this one, guys, and I want to teach it to you the right way, step by step. We're going to cover everything we need in order for you to feel comfortable playing it. Now, I personally like this line of the Pirc better because it's richer. There's so many other things that you could do, and you're going to see it in the moment when we go over it. Now, if you play the Pirc, you have to know three main lines for sure. You have to know this one, which is the classical Pirc, where they put the knight on f3. You have to know what to do if they do the Austrian attack, which is one of the most aggressive ones. And you have to know what to do if they do f3, with the idea of doing bishop e3, queen d2, and castling to the opposite side to then attack. And we also have talked about opposite side castling attack in this course. Now, there are many other setups that the white pieces could do, but these are the main ones. If you learn these, then you could start getting experience with it. And that's what I intend to do. If I see that there's enough interest after today's lesson, where I'm going to cover everything about the classical one, then of course I'm going to move on and do more videos on the other variations. So let's get started again, and actually let me do it from the very beginning. So again, e4, we do d6. I'm not going to explain the first few moves because we already covered the check variation where we start with these two moves. But then after knight c3, instead of doing c6 and queen a5, we're going to do the fianchetto. So bishop g6, and now after knight f3, we have bishop g7. Now, one more thing before we go deeper into this variation. Guys, many people who play as the white pieces, they don't really have anything prepared against the Pirc. The Pirc is not that popular, which could be a good thing for us. People prepare against the Sicilian, they want to have something good against it. They prepare against the French and other variations. Against the Pirc, when they have to prepare against the Pirc, they just say, you know what, I'll just develop my pieces. If I'm an aggressive player, I want to do bishop e3, queen d2, castle, and then I'll see what I do. But no one really studies it. So that means that they're going to be doing natural moves. Like here, you could see people doing bishop e2, bishop d3, bishop c4. Most people are going to do bishop c4. It's just a natural move. You're developing your pieces. So they're just playing standard moves. We know what to do at every point of this opening and at some point in the middle game. So that's one of the coolest things about this opening. When I play it, and by the way, I have played it as a black pieces, of course, but I have also used this system as the white pieces. I just do the same thing. And my opponents have no clue what I'm doing, but I use the same ideas that I have learned in the Pirc. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that along with the Pirc, I have been learning for over 15 years the King's Indian Defense. And I don't want to get you confused, but just for you to see what I mean. This is the Pirc. Look at where the pieces are. Now, the King's Indian Defense is basically the same thing, but only if the white pieces start with the queen's pawn and then they do c4. So if I put everything back, we have d4, knight f6, c4. Look at this. Bishop g7, e4. Now they're about to attack the knight, so we do d6, knight f3, and then we castle. So this is exactly the same thing. Of course, I think the King's Indian Defense is way more aggressive. It's a lot more complicated than the Pirc, but what I've done is I've taken ideas from one and used it in the other, and I have made my own thing. And at the end of the day, what I've got is one system that works against anything that the white pieces do. And like I said before, I could use it myself as the white pieces. So let's get to it now. Like I said, this is going to be the classical variation. And I'm going to focus on this variation, bishop c4. Why? Because this is what most people are going to do. And also the plans that I'm going to teach you, they work even if they go to e2 or to d3. So it's not a big deal. So after castling, and the white pieces castle as well. Actually, let me go back here. At this point, before we look into what the white pieces could do, at this point, guys, there are two main plans that the black pieces could use against the classical variation. And let me show you what I mean after the white pieces castle. So at this point, I already castled, I developed my minor pieces on the king side. It's time for me to choose how I'm going to continue. And basically this is what you could do. You could do bishop g4, which is my favorite, or you could do pawn to c6. This is a move that you saw it in the check perk, but you're going to see it in this variation as well. It's a little bit different, more dynamic. We use it a little bit differently, but you're going to see the c6 in these systems. Even the King's Indian defense, you're going to see a move like c6, which is very flexible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you games that I've played myself, the entire games. So I'm going to teach you one with c6. I'm going to show you another game that I played, actually two games that I played with g4. That way you get the whole idea. We have to do this the right way. So we're going to start with bishop g4 after they castle. The reason why I paused before is because they could castle here, or they could do h3. And when they do h3, let's say you're a person that you really like bishop g4 like myself. Well, if they do h3, that's exactly why they do it. They don't want you to go bishop g4. So what I do in that case, I just do c6. So what I'm trying to say is, it's better if you learn the two plans. If you just don't like bishop g4 and you want to learn c6, well, c6 is going to work against anything. So if this is what you want, fine. But it is ideal that you learn both. So after bishop g4, guys, there's like a forced sequence here for you to get the initiative. Now, before we go any deeper into these moves, you have to understand the main goal of the perk is to allow the white pieces to control the center like this. This is so nice for the white pieces. But we're planning to strike the center. We want to make e5 work. And you learn this in the check variation. So basically, after bishop g4, we're trying to undermine these squares because the knight that is supposed to control them is being pinned right now. So what do you think the white pieces are going to do in many cases here? Well, naturally, many people go h3. So it's like, decide what you're going to do. And I already committed to go here, so I'm going to take on f3. Of course, they're not going to take with the g-pawn, they take with the queen. And now look, this is what I meant by a forcing sequence. So I attack the knight, they do h3, I take the knight, so they have to respond to it, and now knight c6, and I'm hitting d4. Now they have to defend it. Now I'm gonna ask you again, if you were the white pieces, how would you defend this pawn? Well, naturally, you're going to develop the only minor piece you haven't developed, so bishop e3. Many people get concerned with moves like d5. You should know at this point in the course that this is a strategic mistake. Pawns want to remain next to each other, and you only move them if they're being attacked by another pawn. That way you don't leave weak squares. So if they did d5 right now, weak square. And I'm going to start using those dark squares. So I could do knight e5 if I wanted to fork these two. I could do knight d4, attacking the queen, attacking the pawn. And now that we are talking about this variation, let's say that they go queen d3. Well, here you could do c5. If they take, you take with the knight. You could do e5. If they take, you take with the knight. Or you could do what I like to do, which is knight to d7. So I'm opening my bishop to protect the knight. And then after bishop e3, we have ideas like, we still could do c5 and things like that, but you could also do knight e5. So I'm attacking the queen, the bishop. The queen has nowhere to go to protect that bishop. And if they take, I have a discovered attack. So check, and then they take back. Now guys, as nice as this looks, we basically gave up 3 minor pieces for the queen. And it's not so easy to play against those minor pieces. Now, as you could see, I gave you multiple options. You don't have to go into this variation. You could have done c5, you could have done e5. I myself would dare to play this as the black pieces because these pieces don't have it so easy to maneuver. This bishop is locked, the knight doesn't have many good squares, so my queen could start putting pressure at some point, maybe doing f5. So what I'm trying to say is, if you end up playing this variation, well, play them all and then see which one you like the most. And that's the cool thing about this opening. I'm going to give you ideas and variations, and it is up to you, it's up to your style, how which ones you want to pick. So now you know what to do if they do d5. You know that you have options. So if they do bishop e3 instead, then we're going to break on e5. This is the move that we have been waiting for. At this point, this is a critical moment. The white pieces could choose to push, they could choose to take, or they could choose to stay like that, maybe something like rook a to d1. Now, before we go deeper into it, let me put everything back, and you're gonna hate this, but I think this repetition is going to help you. So d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6. Now again, we haven't learned about the Austrian attack, we haven't learned about f3, and by the way, this f3 is something that many people are afraid of. I was afraid of it myself until I found an antidote to it. Now, I really want people to play it because I know exactly what to do, and I get really nice games with it. So anyways, if they do the classical, I continue, bishop c4, I castle, castle, and now we're talking right now about bishop g4. If h3, take, take, I'm going after d4, and when they defend, I strike the center, finally. Now guys, I'm going to show you a game where they took, the way you see what happens here. I'm going to show you a game, maybe not from this position, but where you see this pawn formation when the center is locked. And this is one of my favorite as well. And also we're going to talk about this one because we have to. So quickly here, after we finally strike the center, if they just go rook a to d1, which I don't think many people are going to do so, we could just take. So first of all, we're getting rid of this very nice bishop. And now you could continue with a plan like this. Knight d7, hitting that rook. We know that the rook is going to go back, and now we go knight e5. So this is a very nice position to play for the black pieces. After the queen moves, it is completely up to you if you want to chop off that bishop or if you just want to just do something else. But point is that this is move number 14, and you have a very nice position. Now, in my experience, almost no one plays this move, rook a to d1. If they did something like d takes e5, I just like to take with the knight here. So this is completely up to you. You could take with the pawn, you could take with the knight. I have a rule which is if I have the knight on c6, then I take with the knight. If I had done the other plan with pawn c6, and my knight happens to be on d7, then I take here. And it's going to make more sense when we talk about the other plan. But just know that my favorite is taking here with the knight. And I'm going to show you guys a game with this. Now, the other one that we have to talk about is when they close the center. And this one is going to turn really interesting for you. So let's go over the first game where they actually took on e5. Now, in this game, I simply took with the knight, like I said. And after queen e2, I really like to chop off one of these bishops. So the pair of bishops is gone, then queen goes to c4. At this point, guys, this is very standard. I'm just going to bring my pieces, I'm going to improve my pieces. So this rook likes to go to the semi-open file. Now, as innocent as it looks, there are little tricks here that we have to know. And this is the main thing. This is move number 12, but if you know the main tricks, the main ideas in the middle game, your game is going to be so much easier. So after rook e8, we have rook f2 e1, and now there is a very nice move here for the black pieces. Let's see if we can figure it out. If you want, pause the video because I'm going to say it in a moment. Well, the move that I came up with here, and this is a move that it's not like I found it on the board. This is something that I knew from before. I have studied this opening enough to know the tricks that are involved. So the move here is knight takes e4. So I'm giving up my knight because I know that soon after I have this fork. So after d5, queen b3, giving me the knight back, but they want to take on b7, which is fine. Now I'm going to activate my rook, so I take with the rook, then queen b7, happy to give up that pawn because now I have a skewer. And what that gets me is my rook on the 7th rank. Now guys, look at these rooks compared to these rooks. Look at this bishop, what a nice diagonal compared to this bishop. And of course, I'm putting pressure on c2. So after I took on b2, they just went rook a to c1, getting away from this diagonal and defending the pawn. Now pawn to d4, bishop d2, and I'm taking on e1 because now I know that if they take with the rook, well, this pawn is hanging. So they're going to have to take with the bishop. And this bishop keeps getting worse and worse. So at this point, it is my turn, and I found a very nice square for my queen. And that move is going to be queen g5. Keeping an eye on this king, I'm putting pressure on the rook that is defending c2, and if I ever take this pawn, this is just going to be really, really powerful. So after queen g5, rook d1, of course I'm going to take that pawn on the 7th rank, then pawn a4. So they're making a run for the pawn, trying to get some counterplay, but I know they're not going to make it that far. So now my bishop is switching diagonals. So I'm aiming at that king. Look, I have a bishop, I have a bishop, a queen, and a rook. So after bishop e5, they just played bishop b4, and now I have to be careful, guys. If I just go queen f4, trying to take on f2, trying to go to h2, they're going to start putting me in check, and with the help of the bishop, they could give me a hard time. So I'm always keeping an eye on my opponent's plans because I don't want any counterplay. And by doing that, I found a very cheap trick, but it worked. So c5. Now I'm blocking that bishop. When they move, I could continue with queen f4. They are done. But they took, and now after rook takes e5, my opponent resigned. Why? Well, pause the video if you haven't found it. But basically, if they take, we have a discovered attack on the queen. So check, and then I take the queen. So this game, again, I showed it. I don't really care about this last part, but I really want you to see how the game could continue if they just take on e5. So they take, knight takes, then rook e8, and we're putting pressure on e4. They could have defended it, maybe they don't fall for it, but that's fine. You just continue to develop your pieces and play your game. This is move number 12. This is way past the opening. I just think that you should really know the middle game plans. It's just gonna make your game way easier. So now, let me go all the way back because we have to look at another variation. Now, this other game, and I'm putting everything back, I really like this repetition. It reminds me when I was learning this back then. Like, I would just look at the different variations and then I'll reproduce everything from the very beginning, and it helped me a lot to memorize this. I just had my radio on, listening to music and memorizing these, reviewing games, and I definitely had a lot of time back then, but it was really nice. So anyways, guys, this other game, you're going to see how I played when the center was locked, and the game went like this. So after knight f6, I'm trying to do my perk, bishop d3. Notice that they did not do knight c3. That's fine. I'm going to do the same thing. Then knight f3, bishop g7, they castled, I castled, I'm doing my thing. Rook e1, they didn't do h3. I still could do c6, which we haven't learned yet, but I decided to do bishop g4, h3, I took, look at this, it's the same thing that we already know, and now my knight goes to c6. And as a rule for myself, there's another rule that I have. If I do bishop g4, I rarely do c6. If I do c6, I rarely do bishop g4. I don't like to mix these two plans. Some people like to do it. Like I said before, when you learn both, it's up to you how you play it. Another thing, guys, well, actually, I'll tell you this after. So after that knight is gone, my knight comes out with a tempo, hitting d4. And after I did knight to c6, my opponent simply went pawn to c3. So that's fine, but now I know that my main objective in this opening is to strike the center. So I just went pawn to e5. And again, they could have kept the tension in the center, but they decided to do pawn to d5. And automatically, guys, I'm going to move my knight to e7. And this is one of the ideas that I said before, that I got ideas from the King's Indian Defense and I used them here. Well, this is exactly what you get in the King's Indian Defense. It's one of the most popular ones, and you really have to know what to do here. The center is locked. This is important. What you're about to see only works because the center is locked, and I'm going to talk more about it later. So just know d5, 90% of the times I'm going to put my knight on e7, and you're going to see what the plan is. So after c4, and we talked about this in another lesson, but just remember, if you look at the pawn structure, it is aiming to the king side. So that means we're going to expand on the king side, and you're going to see how. The white pieces are going to be expanding on the queen side. So that's why you see c4, knight c3, maybe b4, just like they do in the King's Indian Defense. So after c4, my main objective, and this is what you cannot forget, I have the center locked, I want to do f5. And this is something else that we talked in another lesson. When we have this kind of pawn structures, my target is going to be the pawn in front of my most forward pawn. So this is my most forward pawn. This guy in front of it is going to be my target. So I'm going to do f5. So of course I have to move my other knight, and I'm going to go to d7. In some games you're going to see people putting it on e8, even h5. Well, you're going to find where you like the most. It depends on the position sometimes, but just know we need to do f5. After knight d7, notice how my knights are retreating, but that's just momentarily, just to get my break on f5. So after knight to d7, they went knight to c3, then pawn to f5. I need to break, guys. If I just stay like this, they're going to do anything they like. I have no counterplay. Now, I'm about to open this file if they're not careful, so they went queen d1. But more than that, this is what I do, f4. I'm going to do a pawn storm even though I'm castled on the same side. Now, this is the right moment to talk again about this. Guys, these pawn storms, notice that you're going to be exposing your king because you're pushing these pawns. Well, this is only advisable if the center is locked. If these pawns were gone, then the bishops could attack our king, our castle. So you only do this again when the center is locked. If they wanted to open up the center to attack my king through the diagonals, it's going to take a while. And I'm going to do the best I can to keep it locked. So now that you understand this, we continue with the game again. Instead of taking, I did pawn to f4. So pawn f4, then my opponent went f3, I went with g5. Now I want to break on g4. Notice how many of my pieces are on this side of the board, and my pawn structure told me I want to attack here. So g5, b4, look, they're expanding on the queen side. Now, these kind of games, and I feel like I'm teaching the Kinsinian defense here, but in this kind of openings, basically the black pieces attack on the king side, the white pieces attack on the king side, and whoever gets to the other side first should win the game. Now, if they get to this side and create something, maybe they win material. Maybe they win my rook, my pawn. If I get to them, I'm going to get to their king, and the game is over. So after g5, and they went pawn to b4, I went h5. I really want to break on g4. Then we have bishop d2, developing their bishop. And now these knights that once I put back, guys, I'm going to bring them back into the game. So everyone goes to the king side. Bishop e2, he's getting ready for this break. Oops, sorry, break on g4. So we have knight f6, then a4. Now, another plan that if you're a Kinsinian defense player, you're going to recognize it. Another plan is, I want to break on g4, so I want my rook to be on g7. So look at these nice plans. When I first saw these plans in the Kinsinian defense, I knew I had to play this opening. It's just so cool. So rook f7 with the idea of bringing the rook to g7 to help us, and by putting the bishop on f8, I'm supporting d6. I know that they're going to break on c5. So anyways, rook f7, c5, bishop f8. So it seems like I'm just so good. I knew they were gonna do that. Well, I only knew this because I have reviewed so many games of Nakamura, Kasparov, Bobby Fischer, so many people who have played the Kinsinian defense. So after bishop f8, they took. I want to keep this locked, so I take with the pawn. Then rook to c1, then rook to g7. Finally, I'm about to create something. Knight b5, a6. Now, typically I don't want to do anything on the queen side. I just want to focus on the king side, but I figured that they have to just go back, and they just wasted a move with the knight. Now, guys, I'm not saying that we both played this game perfectly, but I really hope that this game illustrates the ideas when the center is locked. So after I did pawn to a6, they just had to go back. Now, knight h4, we keep bringing more pieces, and we are about to break. So when the timing is right, we're going to break. So knight h4, he's getting out of the way, being prophylactic. Now, this queen, this plan that you're going to see is not that common. I don't do it that often, but it made sense to me at the moment. So I want my queen to be on the g file as well. So queen e8, then pawn to a5. I don't know what he was trying to do with this. So the queen came to g6. But also, guys, I don't know what he was trying to do here, but there's not much he could do, honestly. Like, he's not supposed to push any of these pawns or to do anything here, because it could actually create more weaknesses. So after queen g6, rook g1, so now he's bringing pieces to defend, and finally I'm going to break. I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 defenders for that pawn when he goes to g4. They have 1, 2, 3, and 4 attackers. So that's safe, but more than that, I don't really care if I'm giving up the pawn for free. I just want to open up lines against the king. So after g4, finally, we broke, bishop e1, and now I did something that you have to be careful with. Notice that he's attacking my knight, so I just went g3. Now, let's talk about this for a moment, because if you're a person who already knows the King's Indian defense, there are two things that you might be thinking right now. Number one, be careful when you lock the pawn structure, because then your pieces can never come in and attack. And the other thing is, sometimes it is okay, or whenever you do it because you have the light square bishop. And that light square bishop in the King's Indian defense, many times he doesn't do much. He's just waiting to be sacrificed and open up everything again. Well, I gave it up, and this is one of the things that many people say. Well, whenever you trade the light square bishop, you shouldn't have done it because you need it. It's so important in the King's Indian defense or some lines of the Pirc. It is true. But in my case, I've been playing this for long enough, so I was able to calculate and anticipate this. So when you learn this, if you play it, you're going to get to the point where you're going to evaluate the position. You're going to see if it makes sense to give up the light square bishop or not. You just need to get experience. So anyways, in this case, after I did g3, it's because I knew I had another way in, and you're going to see what happened. So after g3, they went knight a4. They're happy now. I cannot get in. They're going to move in on the queen side. Well, I don't have the light square bishop, guys, but I have another piece that I could sack on h3. Do you know which one it is? Well, if you don't, please pause the video and see if you can find that piece, and see if you can find the plan to get that piece to h3. Well, I'm talking, guys, about this knight. How do I get to h3? We learned in lesson 52, I think, how we find the fastest route. Well, I want to get here. How do I get to h3? Well, from g5. How do I get to g5? Well, from h7. So there you go, h7, g5, and h3. So I did knight h7, and I don't think he has much here to do, guys. Knight b6. In many cases, there is a very famous game by Kasparov where he sacrifices the rook. In many cases, you just don't care, you just give it up. But I said, you know what, there's no need in case things go wrong here. So rook d8, there's nothing he could do anyways to stab me on the other side. Let me save my rook. So he went rook c8. Okay, now I trade it. Knight takes on c8, and now finally knight g5. They went knight b6, and now the sacrifice on h3. So pawn takes, and now I want to see, guys, if you can find a forced checkmate in 3 moves. Last lesson we worked on checkmate in 3, checkmate in 4, so you should be able to figure this out. Alright, so if you paused the video and you found the move, congrats. The move that I did here was g2. If the rook takes, well, we just do checkmate. So the other thing they could do is king h2, but then we do queen g3, bishop has to take, and then pawn takes back, checkmate. So check, check, and then checkmate. So there you have it, guys. Feel free to go back and review all of this again. Look at the pawn structure. That's why we did this. So without intending it, you guys are learning about the King's Indian defense as well. Just make sure that you understand it. If you have questions, you ask me. Okay, so we have to go over the last game, and I promise it's going to be quick. I think this video is going to be extremely long. So let's go back to the other game. So e4, d6. Again, this repetition is going to help us learn the first moves for the black pieces in this opening. After knight f6, you also see bishop d3. Guys, the most popular move is knight c3, so don't feel this is the most popular move. They just happen to do this instead. To me, it doesn't really matter. I'm doing my thing. After knight f3, bishop g7, then they castled. Of course, I castled, and now when I'm ready to decide if I want to do bishop g4, c6, they said, you know what, forget about that one, because I'm doing h3. So now I have no choice but to do c6. Now, like I was mentioning before, when I do c6, I just, for the most part, I don't do bishop g4. And of course, it's not possible now, but just to remind you that. Typically, I just know I want to break on e5. So I'm going to do, instead of eliminating this defender, I'm just going to bring more defenders for myself. So the knight goes here, the queen goes to c7, and I do e5. If necessary, rook e8. Even though rook e8 comes anyways, but this is where my pieces go. This is what I have to know. It's true that the bishop is going to be undeveloped, but that's perfectly fine. So in this game, after I did pawn to c6, they went pawn to c3, knight b to d7. See, I just want to help the pawn get to e5. Rook e1, and now I need to rush because they're about to do e5 themselves. So pawn to e5, I claimed the center, then went knight b to d2, then my queen, we know where the queen goes, so queen to c7, knight f1, interesting maneuvering with the knight, maybe to go to g3. Then I'm at this point where I have to do my next move. All I need to know, guys, is where my pieces go. So I know my queen goes here, my knight goes here, my rook, I said it before, rook e8. Not only am I protecting e5, but I'm also x-raying e4. So if I ever take, I'm putting pressure on e4 as well. And the other thing, this is a plan that we talked about in the check Pirc. I'm making this available for my knight. So knight f8, knight e6, and by doing that, I'm also opening the bishop. So rook e8, pawn to a4, I did pawn to a5 just to block that, then queen to c2. As you can see, this game is a little bit slower, but hey, you have to know what to do here. Now, it's very common for you to see the white pieces doing something like d takes, then this, and this is how the game goes. So you're gonna have something like maybe bishop e3, even bishop g5, where you could do knight e6, and your goal is to place this knight on f4. So this is something that you're going to get a lot when you play this variation. And don't worry, we're gonna have classes where I'm gonna show you so many games. You're gonna see me using this in blitz games. But in this game, they did not take on e5. They just went queen c2. And there's one thing that I always remember either in the check Pirc or on the main Pirc. When the knight is not on c3, I can sometimes do d5. And it's like a liberating move. I like it. I just have to evaluate the position to see if it makes sense. After d5 here, my opponent just took on d5. But again, before we continue, this is already move number 13. So the opening is over. I'm just showing you the way you see how you could continue in the middle game. So knight took on d5, then pawn took, I took, he took. I don't like to pin my pieces. If I had taken with the bishop, I have to be careful with this pin. I mean, I could do some tricks and things like that, but I just said, you know what, let me take with my rook. He took back, and then my queen is taking on e5. At this point, the white pieces went knight e3, and here I have a question for you. There's no tactic or anything like that, but I would like to ask you, would you guys take the knight or not? Well, I specifically in this position did not want to take the knight because that's only helping them. If I take, they take back by developing the bishop. So I said, you know what, I'm going to instead develop my bishop and let them use one of their moves to develop this guy. So after I went bishop e6, they took, and I said, thank you for improving my bishop. Look at that bishop now. And after bishop d5, they developed. Then I went rook e8, the only piece that was doing nothing. I brought it over to e8, then rook e1. I don't like this, so my queen on the same file as the rook. They could do something like bishop d2. So I just moved my queen out of here. Where? Well, I want to stay on the king side. So I already have a bishop aiming to the castle. I'm going to bring my queen to stay around here. So after queen h5, bishop e2, attacking my queen. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit closer to that king. And now bishop f1. And again, guys, maybe we're not doing the best moves here, but I wanted you to see the entire game. After bishop f1, my other bishop is changing diagonal. I think you saw this already in another game. So my two bishops are aiming to where the king is, my queen is close by. This is looking good for me. So after bishop e5, bishop d4, huge mistake, and now there is a very nice tactic for the black pieces. You should know what to do, pause the video, see if you can figure it out. Well, the move here was discovered attack on the rook. So check, then I took that rook, and guys, there's checkmate here soon, so stay tuned. So after rook takes on e1, they did bishop e2, and then here I found a forced checkmate in 3 moves. Now, after I finished this game and I showed it to one of my students, we got to this position and he actually found checkmate in 2 moves. So pause the video and see which one you could find. Now guys, I automatically, when I looked at this position, there's one pattern that came to mind. This is a tactic that I have trained. So I thought of the idea of rook h1, the king has to take, and then thanks to this pin, I could take followed by checkmate. So automatically I did that. Well, my student, one of my students, he actually found checkmate in 2 moves. So he went queen f4, simpler. They have to block with the pawn, and then rook h1. So it doesn't really matter which one you find. I should have found the checkmate in 2 moves, but I just didn't see it. So I did this, check, followed by checkmate. The other one, again, is queen f4, check, and checkmate. All right, guys, so I'm going to leave it here. I think this is already a pretty long lesson. You must be tired, so am I. If you have any questions, something that you didn't understand, something that didn't make sense, let me know. I'm only going to go over the other variations, the Austrian attack or this f3 and bishop e3 idea, if I see that you guys are actually interested. If not, I'm not even going to waste time. We continue to learn more about middle game, end game, and so on. So with that said, I'm going to leave it here, and I will see you guys next time.